All right, I have a couple of guests to discuss this. So we have Andrij Dobriansky, Chair of the UN Affairs with the Ukraine World Congress, joining me from New York, and Ishak Krishnaswamy, journalist and podcaster from Madison. Good to see you both. So beginning with Andrij, I want to ask you this question as to why Kiev insists on, President Zelensky uses all the opportunities, the UN General Assembly, other opportunities. He gets hold of leaders of the West, U.S. in particular, and Europe, and gets more and more assistance in terms of military equipment and hardware. Why is he insisting so much on this? What is he trying to gain out of this ruinous and deadly war?
Well, what we're seeing is, as opposed to what the foreign minister of Russia said at the UN, we're seeing that the rest of the world wants to help expel Russia from invading a foreign country, not anything about what's happening on Russian territory. This is a war against Ukraine. We've seen numerous instances, whether it was the peace conference in Saudi Arabia, meetings with numerous foreign officials throughout the world. It's not just the leaders of the West that support this initiative. And what we heard, especially this past week, whether President Zelensky was talking on the concept of SDGs or other climate goals for the rest of the world, is the fact that the rest of the world needs to start changing its international norms because Russia has clearly broken all of them. And we saw that specifically when he mentioned that more members of the international community need to be represented at the Security Council, as well as more votes to overrule vetoes at the Security Council level.
Mm-hmm. Asha, do you see eye to eye with that, or you find this to be a Western proxy war against Russia?
Definitely a Western proxy war, because when you call what our distinguished guest refers to as the world, it excludes India, excludes China, excludes Indonesia, Pakistan, the most populous countries in the world. So what he means by world is merely Western Europe and parts of North America, and those are the ones who are rigidly supporting them with weapons. As for the U.S., last November they came on an article in Foreign Affairs which talks about how the U.S. production is low. And even if the weapons are not going to get to Ukraine in a year or two, a great way to boost up these productions or production quotas is to give weapons that may or may not come in a year, and that's what's going on. And this time they're giving one of the most costliest one, which is the cluster munitions. And as for Russia, very few people who understand the history from 2014 and the anti-terrorist operation in the areas of Lugansk and Donetsk would actually call Russia the aggressor. In fact, at the end of 2021, Zelensky had amassed a big column of troops along the borders of Donetsk and Lugansk. And so it is clearly only if time begins on February 22nd, 2022, will you consider Russia the aggressor.
Okay, Andrew, for whatever reason the war started, Russia calls it NATO's eastward expansion, the threat it was feeling, and it warned multiple times about this. But now, whatever the reason, why should this go on? It's a war. People are, losing their lives. Infrastructure is being damaged on both sides. So why not negotiate a solution to this? The West doesn't seem to be willing to do this. They're just providing Kiev with arms to continue the war.
I'm not quite understanding the premise, but if you have an aggressor state on your territory, if you listen to the countries of Ghana and Kenya, who very vocally talked about this on the level of the Security Council when Russia invaded, and again 1 year later, and just this past week, we see that there are numerous countries in the world that do not want to have this stand as a precedent. This is a military occupation of a neighboring country which should not be allowed to stand. But in addition to what you mentioned about why is this going on, it's very much on the minds of Ukrainians when tens of thousands, as President Zelensky has documented, tens of thousands of children have been kidnapped, are unaccounted for and are being forcibly re-educated in a foreign country. When you have numerous instances of torture, we just had a large delegation from the UN Special Rapporteur be in Kyiv, where they saw systematic torture happening in numerous separate areas. So it wasn't a spontaneous occurrence, but yet another instance of an occupying force inflicting terror on a country. This is why the world is standing by Ukraine. Over 140 countries multiple times voting against what Russia is doing currently every day as a daily aggression against Ukraine.
Okay, Esha, your response to that.
Well, if we're going to do the torture thing, I have personally filmed mass graves when I was in Lugansk, which I can send it to you guys if you want to later air it as its own clip. And
Okay.
I've also interviewed prisoners of war on both sides, both from the Russia side, both from the Ukraine side. And only one side, the one who were held prisoner with the, not the official army, but with one of the extraterritorial battalions, did he have a finger missing. That's all I have to say about the torture. But the reason why the war, according to the West, must go on is because it's the Afghanistan strategy. We can't show any weakness to the third world, or else they might try to fight for freedom. So we have to annihilate them. And that's not going to happen because Russia is not the same as Afghanistan or Iraq. And the US has never been able to fight a war where its enemy is on even ground. It's always fighting peasants in flip-flops, like in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. And so that is the hubris that causes them to overestimate the skill of their weapons and underestimate all the other remaining tactics. And it may even cause a detriment to their so-called long-term agenda.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Andrij Dobriansky, Chair of the UN Affairs with the Ukrainian World Congress in New York, Esha Krishnaswamy, journalist and podcaster at Madison. And thank you for watching this episode of the News Review.